The last wagon of the Westbrook caravan disappeared over the horizon, leaving Temperance Neill standing alone on the dusty main street of Pahrump, Nevada. The year was 1878, and she had exactly 27 cents to her name, a small carpetbag of belongings, and a future as empty as the desert stretching out around her. She watched the dust settle with a sinking feeling in her chest, realizing only now how foolish her impulsive decision had been. 2 weeks ago, fleeing Philadelphia with a hastily packed bag and the last of her savings, becoming a mail-order bride had seemed a practical solution to her troubles. Now, with the letter from her intended groom informing her he'd married another, Temperance found herself abandoned in a frontier town where she knew not a soul. The sun beat down mercilessly as she surveyed the modest settlement. Pahrump wasn't much to look at: a dusty main street lined with weather-beaten buildings, a saloon doing brisk business despite the early hour, a general store with peeling paint, and various other establishments that comprised the beating heart of this desert outpost. Temperance straightened her back, adjusted her plain bonnet, and clutched her carpetbag tighter. She'd survived worse than this, she told herself. At 24 years old, she was no stranger to hardship, having lost both parents to influenza 3 years prior. The scandal that drove her from Philadelphia was behind her now. Here, she could start fresh if she could figure out how to survive. The Lucky Spur Saloon seemed to be the center of activity, but a respectable woman couldn't simply walk into such an establishment. Instead, she headed toward the general store, hoping to inquire about lodging or employment. The bell above the door jingled as she entered the mercantile, the cool interior a blessed relief from the Nevada heat. An elderly gentleman with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from behind the counter. "Afternoon, miss. Something I can help you with?" "I hope so, sir." Temperance approached the counter. "I've just arrived in town and find myself in need of lodging and employment. Might you know of any opportunities for either?" The shopkeeper's gaze was sympathetic but not encouraging. "Afraid the boarding house is full up with miners from the new silver strike. As for work—" He paused, considering. "Not much call for ladies' employment in Pahrump, less you're looking to work at the saloon." Temperance felt her cheeks warm. "I am not. Perhaps something in domestic service. I'm quite skilled with a needle as well. Mrs. Hollister might need help with laundry, but she pays mostly in meals." The shopkeeper scratched his beard. "Town's growing, but we're still small. Might try over at the Rocking R Ranch. They sometimes hire kitchen help." "The Rocking R," she repeated. "Belongs to Remington Caldwell, biggest spread in the territory, about 3 miles north of town." He gestured vaguely. "Can't miss it." Temperance thanked the man and stepped back onto the boardwalk, squinting against the harsh sunlight. 3 miles in this heat with her carpetbag seemed daunting, but the alternative, remaining in town with no prospects and dwindling funds, was worse. She had just started north when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A cloud of dust heralded the arrival of a rider moving at a brisk pace. As he drew closer, Temperance moved to the edge of the boardwalk to avoid the dust. The rider slowed his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, as he approached. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in the way of men who worked the land. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat brim, but she could make out a strong jaw darkened with stubble. When he tipped his hat back, she was struck by eyes the color of a summer sky, startling against his sun-darkened skin. "Madam," he acknowledged with a slight tip of his hat. His gaze was curious as it swept over her travel-worn appearance and the carpetbag at her feet. "Good afternoon," she replied, inclining her head politely. He glanced around as if expecting to see someone accompanying her. "You waiting on someone?" "No, sir. I was just heading north." She hesitated, then decided directness was her best approach. To the Rocking R Ranch, actually. I'm told they might have employment. Interest sharpened his gaze. That's so. And what sort of employment would you be seeking at the Rocking R? Domestic work, sir. Cooking, cleaning, sewing. I'm quite versatile. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Well now, that's convenient. I'm Remington Caldwell. The Rocking R is my ranch. Temperance felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course, she would encounter the very man she sought in such an undignified way, dusty, travel-worn, and practically begging for work on a street corner. Oh, forgive me, Mr. Caldwell. I'm Temperance Neill, recently arrived from Philadelphia. She didn't offer more of her story, not wanting to appear more desperate than she already did. Philadelphia is a long way from Pahrump. His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing her. What brings you all this way, Miss Neill? An opportunity that didn't materialize, she said vaguely. And now I find myself in need of employment. He studied her for a moment longer, then seemed to come to a decision. My housekeeper's been after me to hire help. Ranch is growing and she can't keep up with everything. He nodded toward her bag. That all you got? Yes, sir. Well, I can't have you walking 3 miles in this heat. We can strap that to my saddle and you can ride behind me. Temperance hesitated. Accepting a ride from a man she just met seemed improper, but the prospect of walking miles in the desert heat was daunting. And he was, after all, potentially her employer. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. No imposition. Just good sense. He dismounted in one fluid movement, revealing his full height at least 6 feet, towering over her 5'4" frame. I'll be heading back to the ranch shortly anyway, once I finish my business in town. Remington secured her bag to his saddle while she considered her options, which were admittedly few. Finally, practicality won out over propriety. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I accept your offer. He nodded, seemingly unsurprised. I need to stop at the telegraph office and pick up some supplies. Won't take long. Care to wait for me at the Mercantile? There's shade on that porch. I will, thank you. Temperance watched as he tied his horse to the hitching post and strode toward the telegraph office, his gait confident and purposeful. There was something compelling about Remington Caldwell, something in the quiet assurance of his manner that set him apart from the few other men she'd observed in town. She seated herself on a bench outside the Mercantile, grateful for the respite from the sun. From this vantage point, she could observe the comings and goings of Pahrump's citizens. It wasn't Philadelphia, with its cobblestone streets and brick buildings, but there was a certain raw energy to the place, a sense that everything was new, still being shaped by the hands and wills of those who'd chosen to make their lives here. True to his word, Remington returned quickly, a small package tucked under his arm. He secured it to his saddlebags, then turned to her. Ready, Miss Neill, she nodded, rising from the bench. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion, then reached down to offer her his hand. Temperance hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm as he helped her swing up behind him. You'll want to hold on, he advised, and after another moment's hesitation, she gingerly placed her hands at his waist, trying to maintain as much proper distance as the saddle allowed. As they set off at a steady pace, Temperance found herself increasingly aware of the impropriety of her position seated behind a man she barely knew, her body occasionally brushing against his with the horse's movements. In Philadelphia, such an arrangement would have been scandalous. But this wasn't Philadelphia, she reminded herself. The rules of Eastern society didn't apply in the same way here, where practicality often trumped propriety. So, Philadelphia, Remington said over his shoulder as they left the town behind. What did you do there? "I was a teacher," she replied, deciding a partial truth was better than an outright lie. She had been a teacher before the scandal. At a girls' finishing school. Teaching's respectable work. Why leave it behind? The school closed, she said, another partial truth. The school had indeed closed after the scandal involving the headmaster and herself had come to light. Not that she'd done anything improper, but when the headmaster's wife had become convinced of an attachment between them, Temperance's denials had fallen on deaf ears. In a matter of days, she'd lost both her position and her reputation. "Sorry to hear that," Remington replied, seeming to accept her abbreviated explanation. "Teaching jobs are scarce out here, though the town's talking about building a proper school next year." "And what of your ranch?" she asked, eager to change the subject. The shopkeeper said it was the largest in the territory. She felt rather than saw his chuckle, a brief rumble beneath her hands. "Perkins exaggerates. It's a good-sized spread, but not the largest. Been in my family for 15 years now, since my father claimed the land. He passed 3 years back, leaving it to me." "I'm sorry for your loss," she said sincerely. "Appreciate that. Pa built something good. I'm just trying to make it better." They rode in companionable silence for a time. The rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the occasional cry of a desert bird the only sounds. The landscape was unlike anything Temperance had ever seen, vast expanses of sand and scrub broken by rugged mountains in the distance, their peaks sharp against the cloudless blue sky. Despite the harshness of the terrain, she found a stark beauty in it. "There it is," Remington said eventually, pointing ahead. "The rocking R." Temperance looked where he indicated and saw a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. A large ranch house formed the centerpiece, with a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings arranged around it. A windmill turned lazily nearby, and she could see cattle grazing in a distant pasture. "It's impressive," she said honestly. The ranch was clearly prosperous, far more established than she'd expected in such wild country. "Been a lot of work," he replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Still is, every day." As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on an apron. She was in her 50s, Temperance guessed, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Remington reined in his horse in front of the house and dismounted before helping Temperance down. Her legs felt slightly unsteady after the ride, and his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary to ensure she was stable. "Mrs. Winters," he called to the woman, "we have a visitor." "This is Miss Temperance Neill from Philadelphia. She's inquiring about domestic work." Mrs. Winters approached, eyeing Temperance with frank assessment. "About time," she said bluntly. "Been telling Mr. Caldwell for months I can't manage this house alone, not with the crew growing like it has." She looked Temperance up and down. "You know your way around a kitchen, girl." "Yes, madam," Temperance replied, "and I'm handy with a needle as well." "Can you read, write, cipher?" "Yes, madam, I was a teacher in Philadelphia." Mrs. Winters's eyebrows rose. "A teacher, is it? Well, that's something." She turned to Remington. "She'll do, Mr. Caldwell, if you're agreeable." Remington nodded. "Wages are $20 a month plus room and board," he told Temperance. "Sundays off unless there's a special occasion. Would that suit you, Miss Neill?" $20 a month was less than she'd earned as a teacher, but with room and board included, it was a generous offer considering her circumstances. "That would suit me very well, Mr. Caldwell, thank you." "Good, then it's settled." He turned to Mrs. Winters. "Get Miss Neill settled in, would you, Mrs. Winters? I need to check on that new stallion." With that, he tipped his hat to Temperance and strode off toward the barn, leaving her with the housekeeper. "Come along then, Mrs. Winters said, retrieving Temperance's carpet bag from where Remington had set it. I'll show you where you'll sleep and explain your duties." Temperance followed the older woman into the ranch house. The interior was surprisingly spacious and well-appointed, with solid furniture and polished wooden floors. It spoke of comfort rather than luxury, practical but not austere. "This is the main house," Mrs. Winters explained as they moved through. "Mr. Caldwell has his rooms in the west wing. The foreman, Mr. Tucker, has a room off the kitchen. The rest of the hands stay in the bunkhouse." She led Temperance up a narrow staircase. "There are 3 bedrooms up here. Mine's at the end of the hall. The middle one is for guests, which we rarely have. Yours will be this one." She opened a door to reveal a modest but pleasant room with a single bed, a small dresser, and a washstand. A window overlooked the ranch yard, and simple curtains fluttered in the breeze. "It's lovely," Temperance said, genuinely pleased. After the uncertainty of the day, having a room of her own was more than she dared hope for. "It'll do," Mrs. Winters replied pragmatically. "You can wash up and get settled. Dinner's at 6 sharp. Mr. Caldwell takes breakfast at 5:30, lunch at noon. The hands eat in shifts. You'll help with all the cooking and serving, plus laundry, mending, and keeping the main house clean." She fixed Temperance with a stern look. "It's hard work, miss. No place for someone who isn't willing to put their back into it." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mrs. Winters." The older woman studied her for a moment, then gave a short nod. "We'll see. I'll leave you to get settled. Come down to the kitchen when you're ready and I'll show you around properly." Left alone, Temperance sat on the edge of the bed, allowing herself a moment to absorb the rapid change in her circumstances. This morning, she'd been facing destitution in a strange town. Now she had a position, a roof over her head, and the prospect of regular meals. It wasn't the life she'd envisioned for herself, but it was a far sight better than what she'd feared. She unpacked her meager belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a nightgown, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, a small sewing kit, and a daguerreotype of her parents. She arranged these items carefully, trying to make the sparse room feel more like her own. After washing her face and hands in the basin provided, she changed into her second-best dress, a practical blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean. She pinned her dark blonde hair up neatly and headed downstairs to find Mrs. Winters. The kitchen was at the back of the house, a large, well-equipped space dominated by a massive cast-iron stove and a long wooden table. Mrs. Winters was efficiently peeling potatoes when Temperance entered. "Ah, there you are. Take an apron from that hook and help me with these vegetables." 15 men to feed tonight, counting Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Tucker. Temperance donned an apron and took up a knife, quickly demonstrating her competence with the task. Mrs. Winters watched her technique with approval. "Where did you learn to handle kitchen work if you were a teacher?" she asked. "I grew up in a modest home," Temperance explained. "My mother believed all women should know how to manage a household, regardless of station. She didn't add that, after her parents died, she'd had to manage everything herself, learning through necessity as much as training." "Sensible woman, your mother." Mrs. Winters moved to check a large pot of what smelled like beef stew. "Mr. Caldwell's a good employer, fair-minded, expects honest work but treats his people right, better than most in these parts. He seems capable," Temperance said carefully. Mrs. Winters gave a short laugh. "Capable, yes, and more. Built this ranch up considerable since his father passed. Works harder than any man I know." She gave Temperance a sidelong glance. "Handsome too, though I expect you noticed that." Temperance felt warmth creeping into her cheeks. "I hadn't given it much thought," she lied. The older woman sounded unconvinced. "Well, Half the unmarried women between here and Carson City have given it plenty of thought. Not that it's done them any good. Mr. Caldwell's married to this ranch, far as I can tell." Temperance focused on the potatoes, uncomfortable with the turn in conversation. "How many people live on the ranch altogether?" she asked, changing the subject. "Varies with the season. Right now we've got 12 hands plus Mr. Tucker, the foreman, Mr. Caldwell, of course, me, and now you. The hands mostly keep to themselves in the bunkhouse, though they take meals here." She pointed to a separate, larger dining area adjacent to the kitchen. "They eat there. Mr. Caldwell takes his meals in the main dining room, usually with Mr. Tucker." They worked side by side, preparing dinner: a hearty beef stew, cornbread, and apple cobbler for dessert. Mrs. Winters was clearly competent and accustomed to managing on her own. But Temperance could see how the work would be overwhelming for one person, particularly an older woman. At precisely 6 o'clock, a bell outside rang, signaling mealtime. The ranch hands began filing into the larger dining area, boisterous after a day's work. Temperance helped Mrs. Winters serve them, trying to ignore the curious glances and occasional appreciative comments directed her way. "Fresh face around here," one young cowboy remarked. "Mighty pretty one, too." "Mind your manners, Davis," another hand scolded. "Lady doesn't need your foolishness her first day." Temperance gave a polite nod but didn't engage further, taking her cue from Mrs. Winters's businesslike demeanor. After serving the hands, they prepared trays for Remington and the foreman in the main dining room. As Temperance carried in the food, she found Remington already seated at the head of the table, deep in conversation with a weather-beaten man she assumed was Tucker. "Water rights on the north section," Remington was saying. Hammond's pushing again, claiming he broke off as he noticed Temperance. "Ah, Miss Neill, settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you, Mr. Caldwell." She set the tray down carefully. "Mrs. Winters has been most helpful. Glad to hear it." "This is Samuel Tucker, my foreman. Tucker, Miss Neill is joining us as household help." The foreman, a man in his late 40s with graying hair at his temples, nodded politely. "Madam, welcome to the Rocking R." "Thank you, Mr. Tucker. We won't keep you," Remington said. "I'm sure Mrs. Winters has plenty for you to do." Temperance recognized the dismissal and withdrew to the kitchen, where she and Mrs. Winters ate their own dinner quickly before tackling the stack of dishes generated by feeding 15 hungry men. By the time they finished cleaning up, Temperance was bone-weary. The day had been long and filled with more changes than she could fully process. Mrs. Winters seemed to notice her fatigue. "Get some sleep," the older woman advised. 5 o'clock comes early around here." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters, for everything today." The housekeeper's expression softened slightly. "You did well enough for your first day. We'll see how you manage tomorrow when you're not just passing through." She paused. "Whatever brought you to Pahrump, girl, I hope you find what you're looking for here." "So do I," Temperance replied softly. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she caught a glimpse of Remington through an open door, seated at a desk reviewing ledgers by lamplight. His profile was stern in concentration, one hand absently rubbing at the back of his neck as if to ease tension there. She hurried past, not wanting to be caught staring in her room. Temperance changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at the vast expanse of darkening sky. Stars were appearing, more than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia, glittering like diamonds scattered across black velvet. It had been a day of unexpected turns. She'd arrived in Pahrump with nothing but a carpet bag and dashed hopes, and now found herself employed at a prosperous ranch under the roof of a man who intrigued her despite her best intentions. Temperance was under no illusions. She was here as a servant, nothing more. Whatever Mrs. Winters had implied about Remington Caldwell's eligibility was irrelevant. A man like him, educated, successful, commanding, would have no interest in a disgraced schoolteacher with no dowry and a tarnished reputation, even if he knew nothing of the scandal that had driven her west. No, she would keep to her place, work hard, save her wages, and in time, perhaps, build a new life for herself, one where the shadows of Philadelphia couldn't reach her. It wasn't the future she'd once dreamed of, but it was a future nonetheless. With that resolution firmly in mind, Temperance crawled beneath the covers and surrendered to exhaustion, falling into a dreamless sleep beneath the desert stars. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Temperance adjusted to life at the rocking R. She rose before dawn each day to help Mrs. Winters prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, cleaned the main house, assisted with laundry, and mended everything from torn shirts to horse blankets. The work was hard but satisfying, giving her little time to dwell on the past. She quickly learned the rhythms of ranch life, the comings and goings of the hands, the constant demands of the cattle, the seasonal tasks that structured the year. June was moving toward July, bringing increasingly scorching days that had everyone seeking shade during the hottest afternoon hours. Remington was often absent from the main house, spending long days in the saddle overseeing his operation. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but reserved, treating her with the same distant courtesy he showed Mrs. Winters. If he found her presence in his home noteworthy in any way, he gave no sign of it. Still, Temperance found herself more aware of him than she cared to admit. She noticed how the ranch hands straightened when he approached, not from fear but respect. She observed the care he took with his horses, the patience he showed with the younger hands, the quiet authority he carried without apparent effort. One evening, as she was returning to the main house after hanging laundry to dry, she came upon Remington in the barn, gently tending to a mare who had cut her leg on a strand of barbed wire. "Easy, girl," he murmured to the horse, his voice low and soothing as he carefully cleaned the wound. "That's it. You'll be right as rain soon enough." Temperance paused in the doorway, struck by the tenderness in his manner. The big, capable hands that could break a wild horse were now delicately applying a poultice to the injured leg. He glanced up, seeming unsurprised to find her watching. "Evening, Miss Neill." "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell. Is she badly hurt?" "Not too bad. Clean cut. Should heal fine if infection doesn't set in." He patted the mare's neck reassuringly. "Molly here's one of our best brood mares. Foals like clockwork, strong colts every time." Temperance approached cautiously, not wanting to startle the horse. "She's beautiful, that she is." He finished wrapping a bandage around the wound and straightened. "You settling in all right? Mrs. Winters working you too hard?" "Not at all. I'm grateful for the position." He studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "You know, you never did tell me why a schoolteacher from Philadelphia ended up in Pahrump, Nevada." Temperance tensed slightly. "As I mentioned, the school closed, and there are no other schools in Philadelphia." His tone was mild, but his gaze was sharp. "I wanted a change," she said finally. "The East can be stifling in its own way." He didn't press further, but she had the distinct impression he knew she wasn't telling the whole truth. "Well, whatever brought you here, Mrs. Winters says you're a hard worker. That counts for a lot on a ranch." "Thank you." She hesitated, then asked something that had been puzzling her. "Mr. Caldwell, why did you hire me? You knew nothing about me, yet you offered me a position immediately." He considered this as he gathered his medical supplies. "Gut feeling, I suppose. You seemed honest, desperate maybe, but not dishonest." A slight smile touched his lips. "Besides, Mrs. Winters has been after me for months to hire help. If I'd come back without you, she might have quit on the spot." Temperance found herself returning his smile. "Well, I'm glad for whatever reasoning led to my employment. As am I, Miss Neill." Something in his gaze made her heartbeat quicken, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Best get that mare some water," he said, turning away. "Good evening to you." "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell." As July progressed, the heat became increasingly oppressive. The ranch work continued regardless of temperature, though the hands adjusted their schedules to avoid the worst of the midday sun. Temperance, too, learned to complete her outdoor chores early in the morning or late in the afternoon. One particularly scorching afternoon, with Mrs. Winters laid up with a headache, Temperance took it upon herself to bring water to the men working to repair a section of fence damaged in a recent thunderstorm. She loaded a wagon with canteens and headed out to where Remington and several hands were working stripped to the waist in the punishing heat. She averted her eyes as she approached, trying to maintain propriety despite the unorthodox situation. "I've brought water," she called as she pulled the wagon to a halt nearby. The men gratefully gathered around, thanking her as they gulped down the cool liquid. Remington approached last, his bronze torso gleaming with sweat, lean muscles shifting beneath sun-darkened skin. He pulled on his shirt before accepting a canteen from her, a courtesy she appreciated even as a traitorous part of her mind registered the impressive figure he cut. "Thoughtful of you, Miss Neill," he said, drinking deeply. "Mrs. Winters doing all right. Just a headache. She's resting." He nodded, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "This heat's enough to give anyone a headache. We're nearly done here, thankfully." He glanced at the sky where clouds were building in the distance. "Looks like we might get a break in the weather. Those clouds are moving this way." Temperance followed his gaze. "Will it rain, do you think? Hard to say. Desert storms can be fickle, build up big and then dissipate before dropping a single drop." He handed the empty canteen back to her, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Either way, we'll be finished soon." By the time Temperance returned to the main house, the clouds had indeed moved in, bringing blessed relief from the sun's intensity. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a fresh breeze stirred the stagnant air. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the storm finally broke. Rain lashed against the windows as lightning split the sky, followed seconds later by booming thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. "Thank the Lord," Mrs. Winters said, recovered enough from her headache to supervise the meal preparation. "This land needs the rain." The door burst open and Remington strode in, soaked to the skin but grinning. "Got caught in it," he explained unnecessarily, water dripping from his hat and clothes onto the kitchen floor. Never felt so good to be drenched. Temperance found herself smiling at his boyish enthusiasm. "You'll catch your death if you don't change, Mr. Caldwell." "Worth it," he replied, but he headed toward his rooms nonetheless, leaving a trail of wet footprints behind him. Mrs. Winters chuckled. "Man works too hard to remember to enjoy himself sometimes. Good to see him smile." The storm continued through dinner, a symphony of rain and thunder accompanying their meal. The hands ate quickly and retired to the bunkhouse, leaving the main house unusually quiet. Mrs. Winters, still not feeling entirely well, went to bed early, leaving Temperance to finish the evening chores alone. She was drying the last of the dishes when Remington appeared in the kitchen doorway, now dressed in dry clothes, his hair still damp from washing. "Mrs. Winters' turn in already?" he asked, looking around the empty kitchen. "Yes, her headache returned. I told her I'd finish up." He nodded, then seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "I was about to have some coffee in the study. Would you care to join me, Miss Neill, unless you're too tired from your day's work?" The invitation surprised her. In the weeks she'd been at the ranch, Remington had never sought out her company socially. Propriety suggested she should decline a young, unmarried woman sitting alone with her employer in the evening wasn't entirely proper, but she found herself nodding. "That would be nice, thank you." He led her to his study, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk. A small fire crackled in the hearth, taking the chill from the rain-cooled air. He poured coffee from a pot warming on the hearth into 2 cups, handing one to her, before gesturing to one of 2 leather armchairs positioned near the fire. Temperance sat, cradling the warm cup between her hands. "You have quite a library, Mr. Caldwell," she observed, looking at the well-stocked shelves. "My father started it. I've added to it over the years." He settled into the other chair. Education was important to him, even out here. He used to say, "Just because we live in the wilderness doesn't mean our minds have to be wild." A wise sentiment. You were fortunate in your father. I was. He sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim of his cup. "And you, Miss Neill, were you fortunate in your parents? Very much so." "My father was a bookbinder, my mother a midwife. They valued learning, though neither had much formal education themselves." She smiled at the memory. "They sacrificed to send me to school, then supported my decision to become a teacher. They'd be proud of you." The simple statement touched her unexpectedly. "I hope so," she said softly. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. It was peaceful in a way Temperance hadn't experienced since arriving at the ranch, perhaps even longer. "Sometimes I forget how beautiful it is here," Remington said eventually, gazing toward the window where raindrops traced silvery paths down the glass. "Get so caught up in the work I don't see what's right in front of me." "It is beautiful," she agreed. "Different from what I'm accustomed to, but beautiful in its own right. There's a vastness to it that makes one feel both insignificant and free at the same time." He looked at her with renewed interest. "That's it exactly. Most Easterners just see emptiness and hardship." "Oh, I see the hardship," she assured him with a small laugh. "Daily, but there's more to it than that." "There is indeed." He set his empty cup aside. "You know, Miss Neill, you're not what I expected when you first arrived in Pahrump." "No, and what did you expect, honestly?" "Someone who'd last a week before fleeing back east." His expression was apologetic. "Eastern ladies don't typically take to ranch life." "I'm not typical then," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "No," he agreed, his gaze warm. "You most certainly are not." Something shifted between them in that moment. A subtle change in the air, as palpable as the electricity preceding the storm. Temperance found it suddenly difficult to breathe normally, aware of him not just as her employer, but as a man, one whose presence affected her in ways she'd been trying to ignore. Remington seemed to sense it too. He cleared his throat and stood, breaking the moment. "It's getting late. I shouldn't keep you from your rest." "Yes, of course." She rose as well, setting her cup aside. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Caldwell, and the company." "Remington," he said suddenly, "when it's just us. You could call me Remington." The suggestion hung between them, another small shift in their relationship. "Then you must call me Temperance," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Temperance," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Good night, then. Sleep well." "Good night, Remington." She slipped from the study, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Temperance tried to tell herself she was being foolish. An employer offering coffee and conversation to an employee during a storm was nothing more than common courtesy. The warmth in his eyes, the way her name had sounded in his deep voice, these were meaningless details her lonely heart was magnifying. Yet as she prepared for bed, the memory of those moments by the fire stayed with her, warming her from within even as the storm continued its assault outside. The following weeks saw a subtle change in Temperance's relationship with Remington. Nothing improper occurred. He remained her employer, she his employee, but the rigid formality between them eased. Occasionally, she would join him in his study in the evenings, discussing books or the day's events. Sometimes they'd simply sit in comfortable silence, she mending clothes while he reviewed ranch accounts. These quiet evenings quickly became the highlight of Temperance's days. Remington was well-read and thoughtful, with a dry wit that frequently surprised her into laughter. She found herself sharing more of her thoughts and experiences with him than she'd intended, though she still kept the circumstances of her departure from Philadelphia to herself. August arrived with no relief from the heat. The ranch hands were increasingly short-tempered, and even the normally unflappable Mrs. Winters grew snappish as the days wore on. It was during this tense period that a new arrival at the ranch disrupted the established rhythm. Jedediah Hammond, owner of the neighboring Flying H Ranch, rode in one sweltering afternoon, accompanied by his daughter, Victoria. Temperance was in the yard hanging laundry when they arrived, and she watched with curiosity as Remington emerged from the barn to greet them. Hammond was a portly man in his 50s, red-faced and pompous in bearing. His daughter was perhaps 20, elaborately dressed in a riding habit that seemed impractical for the desert heat, her dark hair arranged in a fashionable style. Remington's stance was polite but guarded as he shook Hammond's hand and tipped his hat to Victoria. The young woman smiled up at him with obvious admiration, laying a gloved hand on his arm as she spoke. Though Temperance couldn't hear their conversation, the intimate gesture sent an unexpected spike of jealousy through her. She turned back to her laundry, irritated by her own reaction. Remington's personal affairs were none of her concern. If he and Miss Hammond were acquainted, or even courting, it was not her place to feel anything about it. Later, as she helped prepare refreshments for the visitors in the parlor, Mrs. Winters provided context. "Hammond's been trying to marry that girl off to Mr. Caldwell for 2 years now," the housekeeper confided as they arranged cookies on a plate. "Thinks joining the ranches through marriage would solve his water problems. Girl's eager enough bats her eyelashes every time she sees him, but Mr. Caldwell's not biting." "Oh," Temperance tried to sound only casually interested. "Is there a particular reason?" Mrs. Winters snorted. "Besides the fact that Hammond's a conniving snake who'd steal water from a dying man. Miss Victoria's pretty enough, but there's not much else to her. Mr. Caldwell needs a woman with backbone, not just a pretty face." "I see," Temperance murmured, unreasonably pleased by this assessment. When she carried the refreshments into the parlor, the conversation abruptly ceased. Hammond was red-faced while Remington's expression was coldly civil. "Ah, refreshments," Victoria exclaimed, breaking the awkward silence. "How lovely." She looked Temperance over with mild curiosity. "You must be the new help Father mentioned. From back east, aren't you?" "Yes, Miss Hammond." "Philadelphia. How exotic. I've never been further east than Denver." She accepted a cup of tea. "Do you find our little corner of Nevada terribly primitive after city life?" Before Temperance could respond, Remington spoke. "Miss Neill has adapted admirably to ranch life. She's become quite indispensable to our operation." The warm praise surprised and pleased Temperance, though she kept her expression neutral as she served the remaining refreshments. "How resourceful of you," Victoria said with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've never had a head for domestic matters myself. Father says that's what servants are for." Hammond chuckled indulgently. "My Victoria was educated at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut, accomplished in music, art, and French, not meant for household drudgery." Not everyone finds satisfaction in the same pursuits, Remington remarked mildly. Personally, I've always respected those who aren't afraid of honest work. The subtle rebuke was not lost on the Hammonds. Victoria's smile tightened, and her father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Yes, well, speaking of work, Hammond said, shifting topics, I've come about that northern section again, Caldwell. My offer still stands. And my answer remains the same, Remington replied firmly. The north section isn't for sale at any price. Hammond's expression darkened. You're being unreasonable. That land's more valuable to me than to you, with the creek running through it. Which is precisely why I won't sell. My cattle need that water. I'm offering well above market value. It's not about money, Hammond. The older man's face reddened further. Is this still about that business with your father? That was years ago, and nothing was ever proven. Remington's expression hardened. This conversation is over. You're welcome to refreshments before you leave, but I won't discuss selling the north section again. An uncomfortable silence fell. Temperance, feeling increasingly awkward as witness to this tense exchange, murmured an excuse and withdrew to the kitchen. Mrs. Winters was waiting expectantly. Well, what happened? Mr. Hammond wants to buy land from Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell refused. Temperance kept her voice low. There seems to be some history between them regarding Mr. Caldwell's father. The housekeeper scowled. Ought to be history between them. Hammond tried to claim this land was rightfully his when old Mr. Caldwell first settled it. When that didn't work, there was trouble with cattle going missing, water rights being contested. Nothing could ever be proven, but everyone knew Hammond was behind it. How dreadful, Temperance said, genuinely shocked. That's not the half of it. When Mr. Caldwell took over after his father died, Hammond started pushing to buy the north section. Convenient, since it has the best water access in the region. Mrs. Winters shook her head disgustedly. Now he's trying to use that daughter of his as bait. As if Mr. Caldwell would fall for such an obvious trap. Before Temperance could respond, the parlor door opened, and Hammond's voice carried clearly. You'll regret this stubbornness, Caldwell. There are other ways to settle land disputes out here. Is that a threat, Hammond? Remington's voice was dangerously quiet. A warning between neighbors. Come, Victoria. We're leaving. Temperance and Mrs. Winters exchanged alarmed glances as heavy footsteps crossed the foyer and the front door slammed. Moments later, Remington appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression thunderous. I apologize you had to witness that, he said stiffly. Hammond has never understood the meaning of the word no. No apology necessary, Temperance assured him. Are you concerned about his warning? Remington's jaw tightened. Hammond's more bluster than action these days, but we'll increase patrols around the north section, just in case. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Last thing I need with everything else going on. Mrs. Winters clucked sympathetically. Don't let him get under your skin, that's what he wants. I know, he sighed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I'd better inform Tucker about Hammond's visit. Excuse me, ladies. After he left, Temperance turned to Mrs. Winters. Would Mr. Hammond really cause trouble over land? The older woman's expression was grim. There's nothing some men won't do for water in this country, Miss Neill. Nothing at all. The confrontation with Hammond cast a shadow over the ranch in the days that followed. Remington doubled the patrols around the property's borders, particularly the disputed northern section. The hands went about their duties with weapons close at hand, and an air of watchful tension pervaded the rocking R. Temperance found herself watching Remington with concern. He worked longer hours than ever, often returning to the main house well after dark, exhaustion etched in the lines of his face. Their evening conversations grew shorter as he frequently fell asleep in his chair. the day's strain taking its toll. A week after the Hammonds' visit, disaster struck. Temperance was awakened in the pre-dawn hours by shouting and the pounding of hooves in the yard. She hurried to her window to see men mounting up, lanterns bobbing in the darkness as they rode out. Throwing on a dress and shawl, she rushed downstairs to find Mrs. Winters in the kitchen, her face grave as she stoked the stove to life. "What's happening?" Temperance asked. "Fire at the north boundary. Tucker spotted it about an hour ago." The housekeeper's voice was tight with worry. "Mr. Caldwell and the hands have gone to fight it. A fire. But it hasn't been lightning. No lightning needed when there's men like Hammond about," Mrs. Winters said grimly. "Start making coffee and sandwiches. They'll need food and drink when they return." They worked in tense silence, preparing for the men's return while the eastern sky gradually lightened with dawn. It was mid-morning before the first riders appeared, blackened with soot and smoke, their expressions grim. Tucker entered the kitchen first, accepting a cup of coffee with a grateful nod. "Lost about 50 acres of grazing land," he reported. "Could have been worse if we hadn't caught it early. Boss is still out there with some of the men making sure it's completely out." "Any injuries, Mrs. Winters asked. "Burns and smoke, nothing serious. Davis got kicked by his horse when it spooked, but no broken bones." "And Mr. Caldwell?" Temperance couldn't help asking. Tucker's expression softened slightly. "He's fine, Miss Neill. Dirty and mad as hell, but fine." Relief flooded through her, stronger than she'd anticipated. She busied herself preparing more food, trying to hide the depth of her reaction. It was late afternoon when Remington finally returned. His clothes were filthy, his face streaked with soot, and weariness radiated from him in almost palpable waves. He accepted the coffee Temperance offered with a grateful nod. "Fire's out," he reported. "Lost some good grazing land, but the creek and buildings are untouched." "Hammond, Mrs. Winters asked bluntly. "Can't prove anything." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Fire started on our side of the boundary, but there were fresh hoof prints nearby that didn't match our horses." "What will you do?" Temperance asked. Remington's gaze was hard. "What I can legally do is limited, but I'll be riding to town tomorrow to speak with the sheriff, for whatever good that'll do." He set down his empty cup with a sharp click. "I need to clean up." After he left, Temperance exchanged worried glances with Mrs. Winters. "The sheriff will help surely." The housekeeper snorted. "Sheriff Daniels? Man couldn't find his own shadow at noon. Besides, Hammond's got money and friends in Carson City. Law tends to look the other way when it comes to his doings." The prediction proved accurate. Remington returned from town the following day in a black mood, reporting that, while Sheriff Daniels had promised to look into the matter, nothing was likely to come of it without direct evidence of Hammond's involvement. That evening, Temperance found Remington in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand as he stared into the fire. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure if her company would be welcome given his mood. He sensed her presence and looked up. "Come in, Temperance. I'm poor company tonight, but I'd welcome a distraction from my thoughts." She entered, settling into what had become her chair. "Would you prefer to be alone?" "No." He took a sip of whiskey. "Being alone gives me too much time to think about riding over to the Flying H and confronting Hammond directly." "Which would be unwise," she observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Extremely. Doesn't make it less tempting." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "My father always said a man who seeks revenge should dig 2 graves. Wise advice I'm trying to remember. Your father sounds like he was a good man, the best I've known." Remington's expression softened with memory. "Built this place from nothing, taught me everything worth knowing." His hand tightened on his glass. Hammond made his life difficult at every turn, yet Pa never stooped to his level. Said a man's character is judged by how he behaves toward those who wrong him, not just those who treat him well. He was right, Temperance said softly. I know. He sighed heavily. Doesn't make it easier to swallow Hammond's latest move. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Tell me something about Philadelphia, Remington said eventually. Something good you remember. The request surprised her, but she welcomed the change of subject. There was a park near my parents' home, not large, but it had the most beautiful cherry trees. In spring, when they blossomed, it was like walking through pink clouds. My father used to take me there on Sundays after church. Sounds peaceful. It was. She smiled at the memory. What about you? Have you always lived here, born in St. Louis? Came west with my parents when I was 8. Pa had dreams of ranching and Ma was adventurous enough to follow him. A shadow crossed his face. She died of fever when I was 12. Just Pa and me after that. I'm sorry, she said, understanding now why he never spoke of his mother. He acknowledged her sympathy with a nod. Pa never remarried, though plenty of widows set their caps for him, said he'd had his one great love. He glanced at her. What about your parents? A happy match, very much so. They were devoted to each other until the end. Her voice softened with memory. They died within a week of each other, influenza. I always thought perhaps my father simply couldn't bear to live without my mother. That kind of love is rare, Remington observed, worth more than gold or land or anything else a person might acquire. Yes, she agreed. I've always thought so. Their eyes met across the space between their chairs, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared values, of similar wounds, of mutual understanding. The moment stretched, intimate and charged, until the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9, breaking the spell. I should let you rest, Temperance said, rising from her chair. Tomorrow will be another long day. Remington stood as well. Thank you for the company. It was exactly what I needed tonight. Good night, Remington. Good night, Temperance. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Temperance acknowledged a truth she'd been trying to ignore. She was falling in love with Remington Caldwell. It was foolish, impractical, potentially disastrous, and completely beyond her control. The realization should have troubled her more than it did. Instead, she found herself smiling as she prepared for bed, warmed by something that had nothing to do with the summer heat. September brought slightly cooler temperatures and the beginning of the fall cattle drive preparations. The tension with Hammond's ranch remained, but no further incidents occurred, leading to a cautious optimism that perhaps the worst was behind them. Temperance had now been at the Rocking R for over 2 months, settling into her role with increasing confidence. Mrs. Winters had gradually ceded more responsibilities to her, particularly in the kitchen, where Temperance's skill with baking had won approval from even the most critical ranch hands. Her relationship with Remington continued to deepen, though always within the bounds of propriety. Their evening conversations had become a cherished ritual, a time when employer and employee gave way to simply man and woman, sharing thoughts and experiences in the quiet of his study. One evening in mid-September, Remington made an unexpected announcement at dinner. The Carson City Harvest Festival is next weekend, he told Tucker across the table. I'm thinking we should all attend this year. Tucker looked surprised. All of us, even the hands, why not? They've worked hard, especially after the fire. A day of celebration would do everyone good. Remington glanced at Temperance, who was serving coffee. The ladies, too, of course. Mrs. Winters and Miss Neill should have a chance to enjoy the festivities. Haven't been to a proper festival in years, Mrs. Winters remarked, looking pleased at the prospect. Then it settled. Remington's gaze lingered on Temperance. "We'll make a day of it. The hands can draw lots for who stays behind to watch the ranch, and the rest of us will head to Carson City Saturday morning." The announcement caused a stir of excitement throughout the ranch. For the hands, it meant a rare day of leisure and entertainment. For Temperance, it represented her first opportunity to leave the ranch since her arrival in June. As the day approached, she found herself looking forward to it with unexpected eagerness. Her best dress, a forest green poplin that had seen better days, but still maintained a degree of elegance, was carefully pressed and hung ready. The morning of the festival dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the outing. The ranch was a flurry of activity as wagons were prepared and horses saddled. Temperance helped Mrs. Winters pack a picnic lunch, then hurried to change into her green dress. Studying her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser, she was pleased to note that 2 months of regular meals and hard but healthy work had added a becoming fullness to her previously too thin frame. Her cheeks held a natural blush, and her eyes seemed brighter than they had in Philadelphia. The green of the dress complemented her dark blonde hair, which she had arranged in a simple but flattering style. When she descended to the yard where the others were gathering, she was conscious of eyes turning her way, particularly Remington's. He stood beside his horse, handsome in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his usual work clothes exchanged for more formal attire. His gaze swept over her, appreciation evident in his expression. "Miss Neill," he said, stepping forward, "you look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." She reverted to the formal address in front of the others. "You clean up rather well yourself." A smile tugged at his mouth. "High praise indeed. Would you prefer to ride in the wagon with Mrs. Winters, or—" He hesitated, then continued, "I thought perhaps you might like to ride horseback. The bay mare is gentle, and it's a pleasant day for riding." The offer surprised and pleased her. "I would like that very much, though I must warn you it's been some years since I was on a horse." "Like swimming," Tucker commented from nearby. "Once learned, never forgotten." With Remington's assistance, Temperance mounted the bay mare. Her riding skills returned quickly, and soon they were underway, a festive procession heading toward Carson City. Remington rode beside her, occasionally offering guidance or pointing out landmarks along the route. The journey took several hours, but the time passed pleasantly in conversation and anticipation. As they approached Carson City, Temperance could see evidence of the festival: bunting decorating buildings, crowds in their Sunday best, the distant sounds of music and laughter. "Biggest event of the fall," Remington told her as they rode into town. "Harvest festival's been going on since before Nevada was a state. Everyone comes: ranchers, miners, townspeople. For one day, at least, old grudges are set aside." They left their horses and wagons at a livery stable and proceeded on foot to the fairgrounds, a large open area at the edge of town where tents and stalls had been set up. The hands quickly dispersed, eager to enjoy the food, games, and socializing. Mrs. Winters found acquaintances from town and went off with them, leaving Temperance and Remington relatively alone in the crowd. "Well, Miss Neill," he said, reverting to formality in public, "what would you like to see first?" The festival offered a wealth of attractions: contests of skill and strength, displays of local crafts and produce, food stalls selling everything from barbecued meats to fresh baked pies, even a small dance platform where musicians played lively tunes. "Everything," she replied with genuine enthusiasm. "It's all so colorful and lively." They spent the next several hours exploring the festival. Remington proved to be an attentive companion, ensuring she didn't miss any of the highlights, introducing her to acquaintances they encountered, and treating her to various delicacies from the food stalls. Temperance found herself relaxing and enjoying the day more than she had anticipated. Away from the ranch, their relationship felt different, less defined by employer and employee, more like a gentleman escorting a lady at a social event. They were watching a horseshoe throwing contest when a familiar voice interrupted their conversation. "Caldwell, didn't expect to see you here." Hammond approached, Victoria on his arm, both dressed expensively for the occasion. Victoria's eyes widened slightly as she took in Remington and Temperance standing together. "Hammond," Remington acknowledged stiffly. "Miss Hammond. Miss Neill, isn't it?" Victoria's gaze assessed Temperance's modest green dress with poorly concealed disdain. "How enterprising of you to attend the festival. I didn't realize domestic staff typically joined such occasions." Before Temperance could respond to the thinly veiled insult, Remington spoke. "Miss Neill is here as my guest, Miss Hammond, and I consider myself fortunate in her company." Hammond's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, well." His gaze turned calculating as it shifted between them. "Victoria, my dear, didn't you wish to see the quilting display?" "I believe it's in that tent over there." Victoria looked as though she wanted to object but allowed her father to steer her away, throwing a venomous glance over her shoulder at Temperance. "I apologize for their rudeness," Remington said once they were out of earshot. "No apology necessary." "Miss Hammond clearly considers me beneath her notice." "Then she's a fool," he replied with unexpected vehemence. "You're worth 10 of her." Temperance felt warmth spread through her at the compliment. "Thank you, that's very kind." "Not kind, honest." His expression softened. "Would you like to dance? The musicians are quite good." The invitation made her heart skip. "I'd like that very much." He led her to the dance platform, where several couples were already moving to the lively tune of fiddles and banjos. When he placed one hand at her waist and took her other hand in his, Temperance felt a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with the dance itself. Remington proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her confidently through the steps of the country dance. Temperance followed his lead easily, the years of social dancing from her Philadelphia days returning to her muscles. They moved well together, anticipating each other's movements with a natural harmony that drew appreciative glances from onlookers. As the music slowed into a waltz, Remington drew her slightly closer, still proper, but intimate enough that she could detect the clean scent of soap and leather that she'd come to associate with him. His blue eyes held hers as they turned about the platform, and for those few minutes, the rest of the festival seemed to fade away. "You dance beautifully," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "As do you. I wouldn't have expected a rancher to be so accomplished." A smile touched his lips. "My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a bear with a sore paw." The image made her laugh, the sound carrying lightly over the music. His eyes crinkled with answering amusement, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a barrier falling away, a possibility opening. The waltz ended all too soon, and they reluctantly stepped apart as the musicians paused for a break. Remington's hand remained at the small of her back as he guided her from the platform. "Shall we find something to drink?" he suggested. "It's thirsty work, dancing." They were making their way toward a refreshment stand when Tucker intercepted them, his expression concerned. "Boss, got a situation. Mason just rode in from the ranch, says there's trouble." Remington's expression immediately grew serious. "What kind of trouble?" Hammond's men cut the fence in the north section. Cattle are scattered halfway to the territory line. Mason and the boys who stayed behind are trying to round them up, but they're outnumbered. Temperance watched Remington's jaw tighten, a muscle working in his cheek as he controlled his anger. "Get our men," he ordered Tucker. "We need to head back immediately. Already on it." "They're gathering at the livery." Remington turned to Temperance, regret clear in his expression. "I'm sorry to cut the day short, but you need to go," she finished for him. "Of course, I understand. Mrs. Winters can stay in town with friends if she wishes, but I'd feel better if you returned with us. The situation may be volatile." "I'll come back with you," she assured him. They hurried to the livery, where the rocking hands were already mounting up, faces grim. Mrs. Winters, informed of the situation, elected to stay with friends in town, promising to return to the ranch the following day. The festive mood of the morning was entirely gone as they rode hard back to the ranch, tension evident in every line of Remington's body. Temperance kept pace beside him, her pleasant memories of their dance overshadowed by concern for what awaited them. They arrived to find chaos. Fences were down in multiple locations along the northern boundary, and cattle had scattered across miles of territory. The hands who had remained behind were exhausted from hours of attempting to contain the situation. "Deliberate," Mason reported grimly as they surveyed the damage. "Had to be Hammond's men. Found boot prints and empty whiskey bottles by the cut fences." Remington's expression was thunderous. "Tucker, organize the men into groups. We need to get those cattle back before dark. Davis, check the creek, make sure they haven't tampered with our water as well." As the men dispersed to their tasks, Remington turned to Temperance. "You should go to the house. This could get ugly if Hammond's men are still around." "Be careful," she urged, touching his arm briefly before heading toward the main house. From the kitchen window, she watched the ranch hands ride out in groups, Remington among them. The peaceful day at the festival seemed a distant memory now, replaced by the harsh reality of the conflict that had been simmering for months. It was well after midnight when the men finally returned, having recovered most of the scattered cattle. They were mud-splattered, exhausted, and in several cases nursing minor injuries from their efforts. Temperance and Mrs. Winters's young kitchen assistant, Molly, had prepared food and coffee, which the men accepted gratefully. Remington was one of the last to enter, his expression grim as he accepted a cup of coffee from Temperance. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "Could be worse. Lost maybe a dozen head, but we recovered most." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing in disheveled spikes. "No sign of Hammond's men. They did their damage and fled." "What will you do now?" His eyes were hard. "First light, I'm riding to Hammond's ranch. This ends tomorrow." "Alone?" Alarm coursed through her. "That's too dangerous." "He could have men waiting. I'll take Tucker and a couple of the hands." He noticed her concern and his expression softened slightly. "Don't worry, Temperance. I'm not looking for a fight, just a reckoning. Those often amount to the same thing out here from what I've observed." He acknowledged the point with a tired nod. "I'll be careful." Temperance wanted to say more, to beg him not to go, to express the fear that had gripped her heart at the thought of him confronting Hammond, but it wasn't her place. Instead, she simply nodded and moved on to serve the other men. Sleep eluded her that night as she fretted about the coming confrontation. By dawn, she was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the men who would ride with Remington. When he entered, dressed in clean clothes but with the same determined expression he'd worn the previous night, her heart clenched with worry. "You should eat something," she said, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before him. "Thank you." He ate quickly, methodically, like a man completing a necessary task before battle. When he and the others prepared to leave, Temperance followed him onto the porch, unable to let him go without a word. "Remington," she called softly. He turned back, his expression softening as he looked at her. "I'll be back before sundown," he promised, seeming to read her unspoken concern. "See that you are." She managed a small smile. "We're having beef stew for dinner. Mrs. Winters will be put out if you miss it." A brief answering smile touched his lips. "Can't have that." He hesitated, then stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Temperance, yesterday at the festival before everything happened. It was one of the best days I've had in a long time." The simple admission warmed her. "For me as well." He nodded, seeming to take strength from her words, then turned and mounted his horse. With Tucker and 3 other hands, he rode out, heading toward the Flying H Ranch. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Temperance went through her usual routines: laundry, cleaning, food preparation, but her mind remained fixed on Remington and the confrontation with Hammond. What if things turned violent? What if Hammond had men waiting to ambush them? Mrs. Winters, who had returned from town that morning, seemed equally concerned, though she tried to hide it beneath her usual brisk efficiency. "They'll be fine," she assured Temperance, though her frequent glances toward the window betrayed her own anxiety. "Mr. Caldwell's not a hothead." It was late afternoon when they finally heard riders approaching. Temperance and Mrs. Winters rushed to the porch, watching anxiously as Remington, Tucker, and the others rode into the yard. All appeared unharmed, though Remington's expression was difficult to read. "Well, Mrs. Winters demanded as soon as they dismounted. Tucker answered when Remington remained silent. "Hammond wasn't there. Gone to Carson City on business, according to his foreman. Left instructions not to expect him back for several days." "Convenient," Mrs. Winters commented acidly. Remington finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Coward's running. He knows I can prove it was his men who cut the fences. Mason found a monogrammed handkerchief by one of the cuts JH. "What now?" Temperance asked. "We fix the fences, double the patrols. And I send a message to Hammond through channels he can't ignore." He turned to Tucker. "Ride back to Carson City. Find Judge Wilson. Tell him I'm filing formal charges and requesting a restraining order against Hammond and his men." Tucker nodded and headed back to his horse, not even pausing for refreshment after the long day. Remington's gaze met Temperance's. "I'd appreciate a word in private if you have a moment." She nodded, following him into the house and to his study, where he closed the door behind them, unusual as he typically left it ajar when they spoke alone. "Is everything all right?" she asked, concerned by his somber demeanor. "No," he said bluntly. "I don't believe Hammond's absence is coincidental." He paced to the window, then back. "Word in town is that he's been making inquiries about you." Temperance felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "About me? Why would he, to use against me, I assume? He's seen us together, probably guessed that I care for you." Remington's gaze was direct, almost challenging, as if daring her to contradict this statement. When she didn't, he continued. "Hammond's the type to strike at what a man values when he can't win otherwise." The implication that he valued her, cared for her, would have been thrilling under other circumstances. Now, it only intensified her apprehension. "What sort of inquiries?" she asked, dreading the answer. "He's wired contacts in Philadelphia, asking about a school teacher named Temperance Neill." His expression softened. "Temperance, whatever happened back east, it doesn't matter to me. But if there's anything I should know, anything Hammond might try to use, there was a scandal," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "At the school where I taught, the headmaster. He developed an attachment to me, though I gave him no encouragement. His wife discovered his feelings and accused me of impropriety." The words came harder now. There was nothing to the accusation, but in such situations, the truth rarely matters. The school closed rather than face the scandal. "I lost my position, my reputation. I had nowhere to turn except west." Remington listened without interrupting, his expression grave but not judgmental. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally. "It changes nothing about how I see you." Relief washed through her. "You believe me?" "Of course I do." He stepped closer, taking her hands in a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. "Temperance, I've known many men like that headmaster, weak men who blame others for their failings. You deserved better than to bear the consequences of his inappropriate feelings." Tears pricked at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "I feared if you knew what, that I'd think less of you." He squeezed her hands gently. "I've watched you work tirelessly for months, seen your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. Nothing Hammond could discover would change what I know of your character." The simple declaration, delivered with such conviction, touched her deeply. Without thinking, she raised one hand to his cheek, the gesture as natural as breathing. "Thank you." For a breathless moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, see the small flecks of darker blue in his eyes. His gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in them that made her heart race. The study door opened abruptly, shattering the moment. Mrs. Winters stood there, looking apologetic but urgent. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Caldwell, but Sheriff Daniels is here. Says it's important." Remington stepped back, his professional demeanor returning. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I'll see him immediately." As he left, he gave Temperance one last look, a promise, she thought, that their conversation wasn't finished. In the days that followed, tensions between the rocking R and the flying H reached new heights. Sheriff Daniels had brought news that Hammond was indeed filing countercharges, claiming Remington's men had trespassed on his property and sabotaged his equipment. The sheriff, clearly uncomfortable being caught between two powerful ranchers, had suggested a cooling-off period while the judge considered both sides. Remington had agreed, but he'd also increased security measures around the ranch. Men patrolled in pairs now, and no one ventured near the northern boundary alone. The atmosphere was tense, everyone waiting for Hammond's next move. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Remington and Temperance found themselves drawing closer. Their evening conversations continued, taking on a new depth and intimacy after her revelation about Philadelphia. Though propriety still governed their interactions, there was an unspoken acknowledgement between them that their feelings had grown beyond mere friendship. September gave way to October, bringing cooler nights and mornings, though the days remained warm. The ranch began preparations for winter, ensuring adequate hay supplies, checking buildings for repairs, completing the fall roundup and cattle sales. It was during this busy period that Remington was forced to make a week-long trip to San Francisco regarding ranch business. He was clearly reluctant to leave, particularly with the Hammond situation unresolved, but the business couldn't be postponed. "Tucker will be in charge while I'm gone," he told Temperance the evening before his departure. They were in his study, the familiar setting of so many important conversations between them. "I've instructed the men to remain especially vigilant. Hammond's been too quiet lately. Makes me wonder what he's planning. Perhaps the judge's involvement has made him reconsider his actions," she suggested, though neither of them believed it. "Perhaps." He hesitated, then continued in a more personal tone. "I'll miss our evening talks." The simple admission warmed her. "As will I." He rose and moved to his desk, opening a drawer. "I have something for you. Was going to wait until Christmas, but with everything that's happened." He retrieved a small package wrapped in plain brown paper and handed it to her. "Open it." Curious, Temperance unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather-bound book of poetry, Tennyson's works, a beautiful edition with gilt-edged pages. "Remington," she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "It's beautiful." "But when did you ordered it from San Francisco after you mentioned how much you enjoyed his poems?" He looked slightly self-conscious. "Thought you might like having your own copy." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. "I'll treasure it, thank you." Their eyes met, and again she felt that magnetic pull between them, stronger now than ever before. For a breathless moment she thought he might close the distance between them, might finally give voice to the feelings that had been building for months. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should finish packing. Early start tomorrow." "Of course." She clutched the book to her chest, both disappointed and relieved. Whatever was growing between them deserved more than a rushed moment before a journey. "Safe travels, Remington." "Good night, Temperance." She left his study with the precious book, her emotions a complex tangle of hope, uncertainty, and anticipation. Something was changing between them, something inevitable as the turning of seasons. When he returned from San Francisco, she sensed, decisions would need to be made, words finally spoken. Remington departed early the next morning before dawn. Temperance rose to see him off, their farewell brief but laden with unspoken feelings. As she watched him ride away, she felt a pang of foreboding that had nothing to do with Hammond or ranch troubles, a strange sense that things were about to change irrevocably. The first few days of his absence passed uneventfully. Ranch operations continued under Tucker's capable management, and Temperance fell into a routine that helped distract her from Remington's absence. Each evening, she read from her new book of poetry, finding comfort in Tennyson's words and the thoughtfulness behind Remington's gift. It was on the fourth day that trouble came not from Hammond, as they'd feared, but from nature itself. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon that morning, bringing with them a sharp drop in temperature and a wind that carried the unmistakable scent of impending snow. "Early storm coming," Tucker announced at lunch, his weathered face concerned. "And a bad one from the look of those clouds. Need to bring the herds in from the high pastures." The ranch hands dispersed quickly, heading out to gather cattle and secure equipment before the storm hit. Temperance and Mrs. Winters set about storm preparations of their own, checking food supplies, ensuring adequate firewood was stacked by each hearth, filling lamps with oil in case the storm lasted through the night. By mid-afternoon, the first snowflakes were falling, large and wet, quickly beginning to accumulate. The wind had increased to a howl, driving the snow horizontally and reducing visibility to a few yards. "October blizzard," Mrs. Winters said grimly as they watched from the kitchen window. "Happens sometimes. Can be deadly if folks aren't prepared." Temperance thought of the men out gathering cattle, especially those in the high country. "Will they be all right, the hands?" "Tucker knows what he's doing. They'll bring in what cattle they can and get themselves back before it gets too bad." But the housekeeper's expression was worried as she turned from the window. "Best prepare hot food and coffee. They'll be half frozen when they return." As darkness fell, the storm intensified. Snow piled against the windows, and the wind's moan became a shriek as it tore around the corners of the house. Gradually, hands began returning in twos and threes, stamping snow from their boots in the mudroom, gratefully accepting hot coffee and stew. Tucker was among the last to return, ice crusting his beard, his expression grave as he gave his report. "Got most of the herd down from the high country, but Davis and Wilson aren't back yet. They went to the farthest northwest pasture." Temperance felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. The northwest pasture bordered Hammond's property. Could they have sought shelter at the Flying H? Tucker's expression darkened. Hammond wouldn't take them in if they were freezing to death on his doorstep. "More likely they've holed up in the line shack up there." He glanced toward the window, where snow was now completely obscuring the glass. No way to reach them tonight. Have to wait for morning and hope the storm breaks. Morning brought no relief. If anything, the storm had intensified overnight, the wind driving snow into drifts taller than a man in places. Tucker gathered the hands after breakfast, his manner grim. Davis and Wilson are still out there. We need to try to reach them. He looked around the group of men. Need volunteers. Won't lie to you, it's dangerous going out in this. But those boys need help. Every hand volunteered immediately. Tucker selected 3 of the strongest, most experienced riders, and they began preparing for the rescue attempt, layering clothing, packing supplies, readying the sturdiest horses. As they made ready to depart, Temperance approached Tucker. "Is there anything I can do?" The foreman's expression softened slightly. "Pray, Miss Neill, and keep hot food ready. If we find them, they'll need warming inside and out." She watched anxiously as the rescue party rode out into the blinding snow, quickly disappearing from view. Then she returned to the kitchen, where she and Mrs. Winters prepared healing broths, hot coffee, and bandages, everything that might be needed when the men returned. The day stretched endlessly, each hour marked by increasing anxiety as the storm continued unabated. By late afternoon, with no sign of Tucker's party, even Mrs. Winters' stoic demeanor began to crack. "They should have been back by now," she said, peering out the window at the white wasteland beyond. "Or sent word somehow." Temperance was about to respond when the sound of hoofbeats in the yard sent them both rushing to the door. A single rider was dismounting, snow-covered and bulky in layers of clothing. "Remington!" Temperance cried, recognizing him despite his snow-crusted appearance. He stomped into the mudroom, shaking off snow like a great bear. "Caught the last train to Pahrump before they closed the line," he explained, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Hired a horse in town and rode through the worst of it to get here. Knew a storm like this could mean trouble." Tucker and 3 men went looking for Davis and Wilson, Mrs. Winters informed him. "They're hours overdue." Remington's expression darkened as he shed his outer layers. "Which direction?" "Northwest pasture. Line shack up there." He nodded grimly. "I'll go after them as soon as I've warmed up enough to feel my fingers." "You can't," Temperance protested. "You've just come through the storm yourself. You need rest. 4 of my men are out in this blizzard," he cut her off, though not unkindly. "I won't sit by the fire while they might be freezing to death." She knew arguing was futile. Instead, she bustled about, bringing him hot coffee and food, helping him change into dry clothes, preparing supplies for his journey. All the while, fear gnawed at her, fear for the missing men, and now for Remington as well. As he prepared to leave, she followed him to the mudroom, her heart heavy with dread. "Please be careful," she said, unable to hide her concern. He paused in pulling on his gloves, his eyes meeting hers. "I will." He hesitated, then added softly, "I have a powerful reason to come back safely." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Impulsively, she stepped forward and pressed a kiss to his cheek. "See that you do." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or hot coffee. He squeezed her hand once, then turned and headed out into the storm. The hours that followed were the longest of Temperance's life. She moved restlessly between kitchen and parlor, alternating between practical tasks and anxious vigils at the window. Mrs. Winters, equally concerned, maintained a gruff optimism that didn't quite ring true. "Mr. Caldwell knows this land better than anyone," she assured Temperance. "If anyone can find them and bring them back, it's him." Night fell, bringing even colder temperatures but a slight lessening of the wind. Still no sign of the missing men. Temperance found herself returning again and again to Remington's study, drawing comfort from the familiar space where they had shared so many conversations. She picked up the Tennyson he had given her, finding solace in the familiar verses. It was well past midnight when she finally dozed off in one of the study chairs, the book open in her lap. A commotion outside startled her awake voices, the stamping of hooves, men calling for help. She rushed to the front door, heart pounding, to see Remington helping Tucker down from his horse. Behind them, the other hands were assisting Davis and Wilson, both men barely conscious and alarmingly pale. "They need warmth, quickly," Remington ordered as they carried the men inside. "Temperance, hot water and blankets. Mrs. Winters, get that fire blazing." For the next several hours they worked to warm the men who had been caught in the blizzard. Davis and Wilson had indeed taken shelter in the line shack, but its meager protections had not been enough against the brutal cold. They were suffering from severe frostbite and the early stages of hypothermia. Tucker and his rescue party were in better condition, having been properly equipped for the weather, but they too showed signs of their ordeal. Only Remington seemed relatively unaffected, moving with purpose and authority as he directed the rescue efforts. By dawn, all the men were stabilized, wrapped in blankets before roaring fires, fortified with hot broth and coffee. Davis and Wilson would likely lose some fingers and toes to frostbite, but they would live thanks to Tucker's rescue party and to Remington's timely arrival. As the crisis passed and the injured men slept, exhaustion finally caught up with Remington. Temperance found him slumped in a chair in his study, his head nodding as he fought to stay awake. "You should rest," she said softly. "You've done all you can for now." He looked up, fatigue etched in the lines of his face. "Wanted to make sure everyone was settled first." "They are, Mrs. Winters, and I will keep watch." She approached, gently taking his arm. "Come, you need sleep." Too tired to argue, he allowed her to lead him to his bedroom, a space she had cleaned countless times but never entered while he was present. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, and Temperance knelt to remove his boots. "You don't have to do that," he protested weakly. "Hush, let someone take care of you for once." He submitted, watching her through half-closed eyes as she set his boots aside and helped him out of his vest and shirt. Propriety suggested she should leave him to manage the rest himself, but he was clearly at the limits of his endurance. Keeping her manner practical and her eyes averted as much as possible, she helped him into a nightshirt before turning down the bedcovers. "Thank you," he murmured as he lay back against the pillows, "for everything." "Sleep now," she urged, drawing the covers over him. "I'll check on you later." She was at the door when his voice, soft but clear, stopped her. "Temperance," she turned back. "Yes, I love you." The words were simple, direct, unadorned with explanations or qualifications. "Thought you should know, in case I didn't make it back today." Her heart seemed to stop, then race forward. Remington. But he had already succumbed to exhaustion, his breathing deep and regular, his features relaxed in sleep. Temperance stood frozen in the doorway, his words echoing in her mind. "I love you." 3 small words that changed everything. She wanted to wake him, to respond, to pour out her own feelings, but he needed rest more than declarations. Quietly, she closed his door and leaned against it, joy and uncertainty warring within her. He loved her. And she, though she hadn't spoken the words aloud, loved him with a depth that sometimes frightened her. But what did it mean for them? She was still his employee, still a woman with a tarnished reputation and no dowry or family connections. He was a prosperous rancher, respected in the community despite Hammond's attempts to undermine him. Could there truly be a future for them? These questions would have to wait for answers. For now, the storm still raged outside, and there were injured men to tend. With a deep breath, Temperance pushed away from the door and returned to her duties, Remington's words a warm glow within her heart. The blizzard continued for another day before finally relenting, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts and ice-glazed trees. The ranch slowly began to dig out, assessing damage and checking on livestock that had weathered the storm. Remington slept through most of that day, his body demanding recovery from the ordeal he had put it through. When he finally emerged from his room, looking refreshed though still bearing the shadows of fatigue, his first action was to check on the injured men. Temperance watched him from a distance, uncertain how to approach after his bedside declaration. Did he remember speaking those words? Did he regret them? Her own feelings were clear, but the practical obstacles to a relationship between them remained unchanged. It was late afternoon before they found themselves alone, meeting unexpectedly in the kitchen when everyone else was elsewhere. Remington was pouring coffee. Temperance entered with a basket of mending, stopping short when she saw him. "Oh, I didn't realize, Temperance." Her name on his lips held a wealth of feeling. "I've been hoping to speak with you." She set the basket aside, her heart quickening. "Have you?" "About what I said, before I fell asleep." He looked slightly uncomfortable but determined. "I want you to know I meant it. It wasn't just exhaustion speaking." Relief and joy flooded through her. "I'm glad," she said softly, "because I love you too." The simple declaration transformed his expression, uncertainty giving way to a happiness so bright it was almost painful to witness. In 2 strides he was before her, taking her hands in his. "I should have told you properly. Not half asleep and filthy from the storm." His thumbs traced gentle patterns on her wrists. "I've known for months, but I didn't want to speak until I was certain of your feelings. And there were complications, your position here, Hammond's threats." "And now," she asked, "are the complications gone?" "No," he admitted. "But they matter less than what I feel for you, what we feel for each other." His gaze was earnest as it held hers. "I don't know what the future holds, Temperance. The ranch is still at risk from Hammond, and winter will bring its own challenges. But I know I want to face whatever comes with you at my side. Not as my employee, but as my wife." The proposal, direct and unembellished, was perfectly suited to the man making it. Tears welled in Temperance's eyes, tears of joy and hope she had not allowed herself to feel until this moment. "I want that too," she whispered. "More than anything." He drew her into his arms then, his embrace tentative at first, then secure as she relaxed against him. When he lowered his head to kiss her, it felt like the culmination of a journey that had begun that dusty day in June when he'd found her standing alone on the streets of Pahrump. The kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise rather than a demand. Temperance had been kissed before, awkward, fumbling embraces from young men in Philadelphia, but never like this. This kiss spoke of home, of belonging, of a future they would build together. When they finally parted, his forehead resting against hers, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the practical concerns that had troubled her. "What will we tell the others?" she asked, practical even in her happiness. "The truth. That I've asked you to marry me and you've done me the great honor of accepting." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Mrs. Winters has been expecting this announcement for months." Temperance laughed softly. "Has she? She told me I was a fool if I let you get away." "One of the few times I've agreed with her completely." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. They stepped apart. Though not hastily, they had nothing to hide, but old habits of propriety died hard. Tucker appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding as he took in their proximity and flushed faces. "Boss," he acknowledged with a nod. "Miss Neill. Sorry to interrupt, but thought you'd want to know Hammond's back." Sheriff Daniels just rode in with the news. Says Hammond's threatening to press charges over some alleged cattle theft during the storm. Remington's expression hardened. That's ridiculous. We were all fighting for our lives during the blizzard, not stealing his cattle. That's what the sheriff said. But Hammond's claiming 2 of his prize bulls are missing and he's pointing the finger at us. Temperance felt Remington's body tense beside her. I need to speak with Daniels, he said. Where is he? Parlor. Mrs. Winters is giving him coffee. As Remington moved to leave, Temperance caught his arm. Don't let Hammond spoil this day, she said softly. Whatever he's planning, we'll face it together. His expression softened as he looked at her. Together, he agreed, briefly squeezing her hand before following Tucker to meet with the sheriff. The news Sheriff Daniels brought was concerning but not immediately dire. Hammond was indeed making accusations, but without evidence, they remained just that, accusations. More troubling was the sheriff's report that Hammond had been drinking heavily since his return, making wild threats against Remington and the Rocking R. Man's not stable, Daniels concluded, accepting a refill of coffee from Mrs. Winters. Always been high-strung, but this is different. Something's pushed him over the edge. His inquiries about me, Temperance suggested. Did they yield anything he could use? Daniels looked uncomfortable. He's been showing a telegram around town. Won't say who sent it, but claims it proves Miss Neill here has a questionable past. Remington's jaw tightened. The accusations were false, as I'm sure your informant mentioned. Mentioned, Daniels agreed cautiously, but Hammond's spinning it his own way, suggesting the Rocking R is harboring a woman of loose morals. He glanced apologetically at Temperance. His words, not mine, miss. Temperance felt heat rise to her face, not embarrassment, but anger. The headmaster made unwanted advances. I rejected them. His wife blamed me rather than him. That's the entire story. Makes no difference to Hammond. He's using it to try to discredit Caldwell. Daniels set his empty cup aside. There's more. Hammond's daughter left him, ran off with a cattle buyer from Texas. Word is Hammond blames you for that too, Caldwell. Says if you'd married her like he wanted, none of this would have happened. That's absurd, Remington said. I never encouraged Victoria Hammond's attentions. Man's not thinking straight, Daniels repeated. That's why I rode out here to warn you. Keep your men close to home for a while. Don't give Hammond any excuse to escalate this feud. After the sheriff left, Remington gathered his senior hands to explain the situation. Their loyalty was immediate and unequivocal. Hammond's always been a snake, Tucker summarized their collective opinion. But a rattler's most dangerous when cornered. Will keep sharp. That evening, when the ranch had settled for the night, Remington and Temperance retreated to his study, their private sanctuary where so many important conversations had taken place. Despite the tensions with Hammond, there was a new ease between them, the barriers of employer and employee finally dissolved. I'm sorry about Hammond's accusations, Remington said as they sat before the fire. You don't deserve to have your name dragged through the mud again. I've survived worse, she assured him. And this time I'm not alone. He took her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles in a gesture that had quickly become familiar and cherished. No, you're not. Never again. He hesitated, then continued. I was thinking we might marry sooner rather than later. Before winter sets in completely. The judge who's reviewing our case against Hammond is also authorized to perform marriages. The suggestion took her by surprise. So soon? I thought perhaps in the spring. I see no reason to wait unless you do. His gaze was steady, searching. Hammond's threats aside, I know what I want. Who I want. And after nearly losing my life in that blizzard, I'm more aware than ever that time isn't guaranteed. Temperance considered this. A quick wedding wasn't what she'd envisioned as a girl dreaming of marriage. But those girlish dreams had faded long ago, replaced by the practical considerations of a woman who had learned that life rarely followed neat, predictable paths. And she loved him, deeply, completely, with a certainty that transcended conventional timelines and traditions. "Yes," she said simply. "As soon as it can be arranged." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You're certain?" "Completely." She smiled back, joy bubbling up within her. "Though Mrs. Winters may never forgive us for not giving her time to plan a proper wedding feast. She'll manage." He leaned forward to kiss her, a gentle, reverent touch that still held the wonder of novelty. "I'll ride to Carson City tomorrow to speak with Judge Wilson. With luck, we could be married within the week." The following days passed in a flurry of preparations, the ranch's routine taking on a festive air despite the tensions with Hammond. Mrs. Winters, after initially lamenting the haste, threw herself into planning a wedding celebration that would make the most of their limited time and resources. The Hands, delighted by the news, contributed in their own ways, clearing snow from the yard for the outdoor feast, hunting game for the wedding dinner, even presenting Temperance with a beautifully carved wooden jewelry box as a collective gift. True to his word, Remington returned from Carson City with news that Judge Wilson would arrive in 3 days' time to perform the ceremony. He also brought a simple gold band for Temperance, not ornate, but solid and well-crafted, like the man who had chosen it. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger in the privacy of his study. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found a woman worthy of it, someone with strength and kindness in equal measure." Temperance looked down at the ring, deeply moved by its significance. "I'm honored, Remington, truly. The honor is mine." He kissed her hand where the ring now rested. "My parents would have loved you." The day before the wedding, Temperance was in the kitchen with Mrs. Winters, finalizing preparations for the feast when Tucker burst in, his expression grave. "Hammond's on his way," he announced without preamble. "Riding hard with 6 men. Armed." Remington, who had been discussing fence repairs with one of the hands in the dining room, appeared in the doorway. "How far out?" "Half hour, maybe less." Mason spotted them from the north ridge. "Get the men ready," Remington ordered. "No one fires unless fired upon, but I want everyone armed and visible, and send someone for Sheriff Daniels. He should know Hammond's making threats." As Tucker hurried to comply, Remington turned to Temperance, his expression grim but determined. "Stay inside with Mrs. Winters. If there's trouble, there won't be," she said firmly, refusing to entertain the possibility on the eve of their wedding. "Hammond may bluster, but he won't risk open violence, not with witnesses." Remington didn't look convinced. "Just the same, stay clear of windows and doors until this is resolved." He kissed her quickly, then strode out to join his men, leaving Temperance and Mrs. Winters to exchange worried glances. "Damned fool Hammond," the housekeeper muttered, aggressively kneading dough for the next day's bread. "Couldn't let well enough alone." "Will there be trouble?" Temperance asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Winters's hand stilled. "Mr. Caldwell won't start anything. But Hammond, he's unstable, like the sheriff said, and unstable men with guns are unpredictable." She resumed her kneading. "Best say a prayer, Miss Neill." Temperance did, silently, as she continued helping with the preparations, her ears straining for sounds from outside. Eventually, she heard the approach of multiple horses, followed by Remington's voice, calm, authoritative though she couldn't make out his words. Another voice responded louder, slurred, angry. "Hammond," she presumed. The exchange continued, voices rising and falling, occasionally punctuated by shouts from other men. Unable to bear the suspense, Temperance moved to the kitchen window, careful to stay partially concealed by the curtain as she peered out. The scene in the yard was tense. Remington stood on the porch, flanked by Tucker and several hands. Hammond and his men remained mounted, facing the house. Even from a distance, Temperance could see that Hammond was unsteady in his saddle, gesturing wildly as he spoke. "Ruined everything." Hammond's voice carried clearly now. "My land, my daughter, my reputation. Think you can take it all and get away with it, Caldwell." "You're drunk, Hammond," Remington replied evenly. "Go home, sleep it off. Whatever grievances you think you have, this isn't the way to address them." "Grievances?" Hammond's voice rose to a shout. "You stole my water rights, turned my daughter against me. Now you're marrying that." "That whore from Philadelphia." Remington's posture stiffened visibly. "That's enough, Hammond. Miss Neill is a lady, and tomorrow she'll be my wife. I won't have her name sullied by a drunk with a grudge." "Wife." Hammond spat the word. "She bewitched you, like she bewitched that schoolmaster back east. Well, I won't stand for it. The rocking R should have been mine years ago, and by God, I'll see it mine before what happened next unfolded with terrible speed." Hammond reached for something at his waist, a flask, perhaps, or to emphasize a point, but in the heightened tension of the moment, one of his own men misinterpreted the gesture. A shot rang out, followed immediately by a fusillade from both sides. Temperance watched in horror as Remington fell back against the porch railing, clutching his shoulder. Tucker and the others returned fire, sending Hammond's men scattering in confusion. Hammond himself was thrown from his horse as it reared in panic, landing heavily in the churned snow of the yard. "Remington!" Temperance cried, abandoning caution as she ran for the door. Mrs. Winters tried to stop her. "Miss Neill, no, stay inside." But Temperance was already out the door and across the porch, heedless of the danger as she knelt beside Remington. Blood seeped between his fingers where he gripped his shoulder, his face pale but determined. "I'm all right," he assured her, though the tightness of his voice belied the claim. "Just a graze." "Hammond," she followed his gaze to where Hammond lay unmoving in the yard, a growing stain of red spreading across the snow beneath him. Tucker was cautiously approaching the fallen man, his rifle still raised. "Dead," Tucker announced after a moment, his voice grim. "Took a bullet to the chest." Might have been one of his own men in the confusion. The shooting had stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Hammond's men, seeing their employer fallen, had retreated to a safe distance but hadn't fled. They looked uncertain, awaiting direction now that their leader was gone. "Someone ride for the doctor," Temperance ordered, taking charge as she helped Remington to his feet. "And the sheriff. Mrs. Winters, prepare hot water and bandages." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The doctor arrived from Pahrump to treat Remington's wound, a bullet grazed to the upper arm that was painful but not life-threatening. Sheriff Daniels arrived soon after, taking statements from everyone present about the shooting. It quickly became clear that Hammond had initiated the confrontation, arriving armed and intoxicated with clearly hostile intent. His men, soberer than their employer, confirmed that no one from the rocking R had fired first. The shot that killed Hammond had indeed come from one of his own men, firing wildly in the confusion. "A damned mess," Daniels concluded after his investigation, "but a clear case of self-defense and accidental death. Hammond brought this on himself." He looked at Remington, who sat with his arm bandaged, Temperance at his side. "I'm sorry it came to this, Caldwell. Hammond wasn't always like this. The loss of his wife years back, then his daughter running off. It broke something in him." "I never wished him harm," Remington said quietly. "Despite everything." "I know that," Daniel sighed heavily. I'll need to take the body back to town, make a full report. Hammond's foreman seems level-headed enough. Said he'll keep the Flying H running until they determine who inherits. After the sheriff left with Hammond's body, and the doctor had given final instructions for Remington's care, a somber quiet fell over the ranch. The celebration planned for the following day now seemed inappropriate, the wedding itself in question. Perhaps we should postpone, Temperance suggested as she helped Remington to his room, mindful of his injured arm. Under the circumstances, no. His voice was firm despite his weariness. Unless you wish to wait. I don't, she admitted. But a man died today. It seems wrong to celebrate so soon after. Remington sat carefully on the edge of his bed, wincing slightly as the movement jarred his wound. Hammond chose his path. I won't let his final act be disrupting our happiness. He looked up at her, his expression resolute. We'll proceed as planned, though perhaps more quietly than we'd intended. She nodded, relieved. I'll speak with Mrs. Winters. A simple ceremony, just the ranch family. Perfect. He caught her hand as she turned to leave. Temperance, today when the shooting started. You ran to me despite the danger. Of course I did. It was reckless, he chided gently, but I've never felt so cherished as I did seeing you there, heedless of your own safety. She smiled, touching his cheek. Get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day. The wedding took place the following afternoon, just as planned, though with a more subdued atmosphere than originally envisioned. Judge Wilson, informed of the previous day's events, kept the ceremony brief but meaningful. In the main parlor of the Rocking R with Mrs. Winters, Tucker, and the ranch hands as witnesses, Temperance Neill became Mrs. Remington Caldwell. She wore her best dress, the green poplin, freshly pressed and adorned with a lace collar Mrs. Winters had contributed. Remington, his arm in a sling beneath his suit jacket, looked handsome despite his pallor from the injury. I, Remington, take thee, Temperance, to be my wedded wife. He spoke the traditional vows with quiet conviction, his good hand steady as it held hers. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When it was her turn, Temperance's voice was clear and unwavering. I, Temperance, take thee, Remington, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, and when Remington bent to kiss her, the room erupted in cheers and applause from the assembled ranch hands. It was a moment of pure joy amidst the shadow of recent events, a reminder that life continued, that love endured, even in the face of tragedy. The celebration that followed was smaller than originally planned, but no less heartfelt. Mrs. Winters had outdone herself with the wedding feast, and the hands had decorated the dining room with winter greenery and ribbon. There was music from Mason's fiddle, dancing despite Remington's injury, and a general air of relief and happiness that their employer had not only survived but found love. As the evening wore on, Temperance found herself drawn to the window, looking out at the star-filled night. Snow blanketed the ranch, pristine and peaceful in the moonlight, all traces of yesterday's violence erased by a fresh snowfall overnight. Remington joined her, slipping his good arm around her waist. "What are you thinking, Mrs. Caldwell?" The name, her new name, brought a smile to her lips. "About journeys. How I came west with nothing but a carpetbag and broken dreams, not knowing what awaited me. And now," he pressed a kiss to her temple, "now I have everything I never dared hope for, a home, a purpose." She turned in his arms to face him. "A husband I love more than I thought possible. I'm the fortunate one," he said softly. When you first arrived standing alone on that street in Pahrump, you looked so lost, but there was strength in you even then. Dignity. His eyes held hers, full of love and promise. I think I began falling in love with you that very day. And I with you, she admitted. Though I fought against it, believing someone like me had nothing to offer someone like you, he shook his head. You had yourself, your courage, your kindness, your intelligence. Everything that makes you who you are. His expression grew serious. I don't need anything else, Temperance, just you beside me for whatever life brings. I'm here, she whispered, and I always will be. Their kiss sealed the promise, a commitment beyond words, beyond vows, a dedication of heart and soul that would weather whatever storms the future might hold. 5 years later, the spring sun warmed the porch of the rocking R as Temperance sat in her rocking chair, watching her 3-year-old son, James, chase butterflies in the yard. Beside her, cradled in her arms, their 6-month-old daughter, Elizabeth, dozed peacefully. The ranch had prospered in the years since Hammond's death. His property had eventually been sold to a mining company, ending the long-standing dispute over water rights. The rocking R had expanded, adding new pastures and cattle, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. More importantly, it had grown as a family. Mrs. Winters, now in her 60s but still formidable, had taken on the role of honorary grandmother to the children. Tucker remained foreman, loyal as ever. Many of the original hands still worked the ranch, now more like extended family than employees. Temperance heard the approach of riders and smiled, knowing who led them. Moments later, Remington appeared around the bend in the road, returning from the spring roundup with Tucker and several hands. He spotted her on the porch and raised his hat in greeting, then urged his horse forward ahead of the others. James, seeing his father, abandoned the butterflies with a squeal of delight. Papa's home. Remington dismounted in one fluid motion, the old bullet wound long healed, and swept his son into his arms. There's my boy. Have you been helping your mama while I was gone? Yes. I fed the chickens and didn't chase them at all. Much, Temperance corrected with a laugh. He didn't chase them much. Remington carried James up to the porch, bending to kiss Temperance before peering at their sleeping daughter. And how's my little princess? Perfect, Temperance replied. Though she'll be hungry soon. How was the roundup? Successful. Cattle came through the winter well, calving rates the best we've had. He sat beside her, still holding James on his knee. Missed you though, all of you. We missed you too. She reached out to touch his face, a gesture that had become second nature over their years together. But we're together now. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. Always. As the evening settled around them, with James chattering about his adventures while his father was away and Elizabeth waking with hungry demands, Temperance felt a contentment that still sometimes seemed miraculous. From that desperate day in Pahrump to this peaceful evening on the porch of what was now truly her home, the journey had been unexpected, sometimes difficult, but ultimately blessed. I have nothing to offer. She had whispered that long ago day when she'd first begun to acknowledge her feelings for Remington, fearing that her past and her circumstances made her unworthy of his love. You have yourself, he had replied, and that's everything. Years later, surrounded by the family they had created together, Temperance knew the truth of those simple words. She had offered herself her heart, her strength, her faith in their shared future. And in return, she had received a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined in her darkest moments. As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky above the rocking R, Remington's arm settled around her shoulders, drawing her close. No words were needed between them now, just the comfortable silence of two people who had found in each other everything they needed. Everything they had once feared was beyond their reach. Home, love, family. The essential treasures that made life worth living, that gave meaning to the struggles and joy to the triumphs. Temperance had found them all in the wild Nevada desert, in the heart of a man who had seen her worth when she herself had doubted it. And in the gentle rhythm of their days together, in the laughter of their children and the quiet moments shared by the hearth, she found the answer to a question she had long ago stopped asking. What she had to offer was indeed enough. It always had been.